What's beautiful about raw food is that especially if you choose well-mineralized food, commercial food is just completely not enough. There's not enough minerals into commercial food to keep anything alive, let alone us. This complicated organism that has balanced precariously on several different organs like our brain, our reproductive system, that stuff is just not going to, our eyes, that's not going to cut it on commercial food. Lettuce, which is pretty much just, commercial iceberg lettuce, that's like water and petroleum jelly together or something. That's white. It doesn't even have green in it. The further organic you go, the richer the food is, the more minerals it has, the stronger it is, and really what's the best option in this culture that we live in currently right now is to even move into having all that organic food and superfoods. Because superfoods are basically powdered up wild foods which give your body enough minerals to not only push out stuff that shouldn't be in there and to reverse old stuff that's been piling in, but also to prepare and mineralize for the future. Minerals are everything. Mineralization is everything. All the minerals of life, by the way, are located in seawater. All the minerals that we could ever think of are located right out there in the ocean. If we go back and we look at how we got to this place where we are in our culture, one thing we find is that we now have green foods, okay, that have had the medicines/toxins bred out of them. A good one's lettuce. This is both good and bad. One is that lettuce is a food, however, it doesn't really have medicinal properties anymore. What's great about it, though, is it allows us to take lettuce, juice it, and we can get blasted with a whole bunch of chlorophyll and minerals a little easier than if we're doing wild lettuce. Wild lettuce being very bitter, has a white sappy substance in it. And therefore, we have the opportunity now to start getting this amazing green food into our body fairly easily as compared to if we went out and tried to eat wild grass or weeds or whatever. When we do that, the first thing that happens with green food is we start to alkalize our system. There's a whole debate. If you look at this book and that book and the other book, one book says, well, that's alkaline, that's acidic. Another book says, oh, no, that's neutral and that's neutral. Another book says, that's both acidic, and the other one is alkaline. And then the other one says, well, that's all alkaline, actually. And nobody's in agreement about this. And here's what you can experiment with yourself. There's really only one alkaline food, and it's green leaves, green leafy vegetables. That's the only alkaline food. Anything other than that is either going to be neutral, slightly acidic, or extremely acidic. In most cases, the food of civilization is extremely acidic, and because of the saturation of acids, starts causing people to reach for stimulants to create bowel movements and to create flexibility in many cases, which is called coffee. See, all the things we talk about, like we hear a lot about tobacco addiction, coffee addiction, caffeine addiction. We hear so much about marijuana addiction, and we hear so much about alcohol addiction. All of those things are related to being hooked into an acidic forming diet, which causes a demand for something that is an alkaline substitute or a pseudo-alkaline food. So all those foods, the processed foods that's starchy in quality, starchy food or sugary in quality, has a tendency to attract fungus. And therefore, when it's sealed airtight, so fungus can't get in many times, right? The big Fruit Loops container, which is beautiful packaging and all of that, then you open it up and it's like, where's the beef? They've got this big bag and there's about that much Fruit Loops at the bottom. You remember this? I remember that as a kid, trying to figure that out. I was thinking, God, this is great marketing. Anyway, this food that is processed, typically coming from grain or from starchy roots, is so heavily hybridized today, so chemically grown, so prone to fungus, that eating that food actually causes mutagenic changes in our body because fungus is attracted in. Fungus or mold is the most mutagenic substance on the planet, and mutagenesis in our body is basically something we would really like to avoid at all costs, because in this world, the number one killer, certainly very soon, is going to be cancer. It's going to surpass heart disease, probably already has. If you combine iatrogenic illnesses with cancer, meaning iatrogenic, meaning doctor-induced, you combine those two together and it actually surpasses heart disease now. Because chemotherapy is actually iatrogenic. It's not death by cancer. Let's notice that. So what can happen? So people die of pneumonia from chemotherapy, right? And so they don't go down as a cancer death, they go down as a pneumonia death. The cancer is really about keeping mutagenic material, fungus, mold, yeast, and harmful bacteria, viruses out of your body and keeping your own genetic integrity very strong. The food that we have basically raised through the 20th century is unfit for consumption even though we have consumed it. Now we're going, wait, now the omnivorous idea is, well, if I can chew something up and live to tell the story, it must be okay. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. And I would say this, there's a huge assumption that's underlying all of this, and that is that there's the assumption in our culture that cooking food is okay. That's a total assumption. We don't know either way, really. I could cite a million scientific studies on one side and on the other side, and we go back and forth all day long arguing back and forth. Here's what you can do. You can try it yourself, and you can see. Does vegetable juice really make a difference for me? Well, you'll find you do it for a while, and you'll start craving it because your body will know, it will be educated as to how to get the biochemistry back into balance and get the alkalinity back. Here's how this all fits in. That most of the situation we're facing as a culture in terms of demineralization, right? The most important thing is minerals, building up minerals, becoming fully mineralized, which is very close to becoming fully actualized, which is also very close to becoming up to your full potential, which is also very close to becoming more in touch with a higher frequency of thought or consciousness. There's a great quote. You ever have a quote that just like comes from out of the universe into the subconscious mind? This happened for me when I read this book one time, and there's a quote in there, and it just literally like leapt off the page into my subconscious mind, and that quote was, minerals are required for higher consciousness. Minerals are required for higher consciousness. That the more mineral frequencies we have, the more color we have in our electromicroscopic, spectrographic readout of what's actually going on inside of our body. And the more color we have, it's the more richness. Is all our ancestors ate something that probably wasn't ideal for us, just because there was nothing else, or that's what was available. And what's available to us now, and maybe for the first time ever in the whole history of the planet, is we can nourish ourselves exclusively with the food that is ideal for us. Never having to take anything because our ancestors ate it, or because this person said so, or because of whatever, because it feels right. And what happens when we get there is we start to get beyond even our genetics and start to go back into our archetypical blueprint. And flexibility is just a byproduct of all this. That we have actually been raised in a civilization, and all of us have ate the same things as everybody else has. And it's possible, and the suggestion is possible, that it might have been the wrong stuff. That's possible. And I'll say things tonight might be a little bit outside of the wall of where you're at. It might be a little bit different than something you've heard before. And what I'm inviting you to do and be able to do tonight is to open up the possibility of what could be the situation. Even if you don't buy into it, even if it's just information for you, just to open up your mind so that you can have a new way to creatively think about things, at least that much. Some of the information is logical, makes sense, it's dialed in, just, yeah, that makes sense. Some of it's illogical. And I do believe that the beginning of all wisdom is about being able to discern that there's going to be some messiness in the universe. That it's not all just, we've got it all figured out, here's how it is. What we have out there with this whole city, the way the city was built, cars, trains, automobiles, planes, all of that stuff, is just the exploitation of a few natural relationships. And that's it. That's what creates that technology. It's not that, well, we've got it so figured out that this is how it is, and this is how the universe works. Hardly the case. Just the exploitation of a few natural relationships. This is an exciting time because the technology in all fields is accelerating rapidly because of the speed of communication and the internet. And the internet now allows us to communicate in a way where I can send you an email and you can send me one back in 10 seconds, and all of a sudden we have this feedback loop happening even though you're around the world. What that does is that the speed of communication determines the speed of how quick technology can be transferred. And so in every field, we are seeing an acceleration of information and technology and ideas. And we know now, we know pretty well dialed in what foods to eat for longevity, what practices to do for longevity, how to eat for beauty, what practices are appropriate for flexibility, what diet is appropriate for flexibility. That's all been figured out. The main thing is which of those ideas can you fit in to your lifestyle? How can you all tie it all in together? I think the first part of this is an understanding that there is a phrase that we've all heard. It's almost miraculous in how pervasive it is in all cultures. And the phrase is so deep in our consciousness that none of us here could even remember the first time we heard it or even approximate how many times we've heard it. It is the one law of the universe. It is the law that determines or filters out or precipitates everything else. And that law is, you are what you eat. That is the phrase. And one day it hit me when I was giving a lecture that phrase really is the whole thing. Because if we eat food that's vibrating in a high frequency of joy, laughter, bliss, mineralization, richness, electromagnetism, then what happens is it's easier, notice how I say this, it's easier to experience joy, laughter, bliss, happiness, fun, good times, the best day ever. However, if we eat food that's vibrating in this frequency, which is death, pain, fire, destruction, anger, frustration, that stuff, then it becomes easier to experience those emotions. And as the food goes completely sideways, where there's no minerals in the food, it's completely processed, there's nothing really there, there's absolutely no prana or life force or electromagnetism happening whatsoever, this is the whole deal, I think. As this food goes from this beautiful raw piece of cabbage to this, which is the same piece of cabbage that's been cooked, then our whole civilization starts to look like this. I think I saw this in the subway today. And that's the whole argument. That I don't need to go any more than that. We could go spend all day talking about the formation of acrylamide and basically plastics in baked goods and carbohydrates and how carcinogenic they are. We could talk about that, or we could talk about the corruption of amino acids, like tryptophan being destroyed by the cooking process. Tryptophan is basically it's the ancestor of serotonin, dopamine, and the tryptamines, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and all the blood and all the brain chemicals are basically formed out of tryptophan. And if there's a deficiency of tryptophan because the food's been cooked, then we got a whole issue going on right there. And that is a major part of what's going on in the world today, especially in our civilization, is people's brain chemistry is going sideways because this organ is very poised on a delicate chemistry. And dumping anything in there is probably going to lead to things getting a little bit out of kilter. Here's what's exciting, and here's what's a possibility that you can look at. So listen very closely. That it's possible that everyone here, everybody, including myself, has been built out of, basically you are what you eat, built out of the wrong stuff. Food that was never meant to be eaten, food that wasn't right for us, food that we were actually allergic to and didn't know it. Dairy products, top of the list in allergies. Grains, second on the list in allergies. Strangely enough, meat, lowest on the list in allergies. That we could have been actually having an inflammatory response to foods, not even knowing it. And not only that, all the pieces aren't fitting in properly. So nothing's really built properly. And here's what I've noticed, is that if you do eat the best food ever that's available to us now, instead of industrial age food, which is in the past, this is what's out here, by the way. This is all industrial age food. We don't live in the industrial age anymore. We live in the computer FedEx age. And in this age, we can choose at any time to have the best food ever. The best food available on the planet is at your button stroke. You can hit a key and it is there. And that food, when you put that in your body and you start building yourself out of that, here's what happens. If the food we're eating was demineralized, it was just anything, then our sensual experience of the universe is different than what it would be if instead of having 26 minerals in our diet, we have 92 minerals in our diet. And they're all coming from plants. And we're getting all the frequencies of all those plants and all the information of those plants. Then our sensual experience of reality is different. And the conversation we're having day to day is different because it becomes easier to be in a higher vibration. And by the way, this clash that occurs between stuff that's down here, that's crystallized into our system, our energy grid, and stuff that's up here, that clash is, that conflict is what a detoxification is all about. That's breaking it in the most simplest sense. That a detoxification is high vibe food coming in, like green vegetable juice coming into the body, and anything that's not vibrating in that frequency is going, uh-oh. And it starts to percolate out. And that might be physical toxins coming out, like, ah! And then all the stuff is coming out of your skin. You're going, what's going on here? And then it might form its way out into an emotional thought, or it might form its way out into a spiritual kind of morbidity that needs to be purged out or whatever. It can manifest its way out in different forms, yet it's all the same thing, which is really this one type of crystallized lower energy is being driven out by a higher frequency of energy. We are in a state right now with our whole culture that actually what's happened is that everybody is open to this conversation. Everybody. Because everybody in a deep sense knows that the fast food and the other stuff that people have eaten their whole lives isn't right. That something is wrong with the food in some way. And that something isn't clicking perfectly. And that mood swings, anger, frustration, the ups and downs, emotional turmoil, that all that stuff is driven by poor choices. And is reversed by excellent choices. And this is all about choice. It's not about, this is what you're supposed to be doing, you're supposed to have that, you're supposed to have this and that, don't have that, put that down, get away from this. It's not about that at all. It's about being able to look out there intelligently, because each person in here is actually a genius. In fact, Walter Russell said, I believe sincerely that mediocrity is self-inflicted and genius is self-bestowed. That each one of you is actually incredibly intelligent, and the media has spent 25 years, 30 years, or however many years you've been on the planet trying to instill a belief that they know better than you. That somebody else knows better than you do. You're the only one who knows best. And you actually are capable of making excellent choices when you're given the choice. And why this information is before you right now is because now you have another choice. The whole point of everything is just outthinking yourself. Remaking yourself by outthinking yourself. It's the point of getting into the high vibration of the live food. The sprouts, the vegetables, the fruits, the nuts, the seeds, the sea vegetables, the superfoods. All of that is in there, by the way. And I come at you with a whole understanding about raw food nutrition. I've seen people go right off the deep end. I mean, way overboard the deep end by thinking, well, I'm a fruitarian and I'm just going to do fruit only. Really, what I'm saying here is there's a little bit of a policy of insurance to build under everything that if you're going to embark on this path, I highly recommend that you look at all the foods that are available to you so that you have an option of saying, you know, I feel like something salty and gummy, sea vegetables. That's what I need right now. Because sometimes it'll flip on you. You might be going strong on one certain kind of diet of raw food, and then all of a sudden you go, whoa, you know what? It's wintertime. I need something different. And then you flip to different foods, and by experience of trying all this different stuff, all of a sudden you'll go, you know what, my body really wants blue-green algae. Or my body really, I need bee pollen. Or dates now for some reason. Or olives fit the bill right now. Or I really want to eat pumpkin. Anybody ever eaten a pumpkin here? Pumpkin's good. Incredible food. Natives lived on that. Indigenous food here. Good to know about indigenous food. We'll get back to that. The point is that if you hang in that high vibration, look at all the choices which are available to you, because certainly the truth is that the diet for you, the raw food diet that's going to work for you, is going to be way different from the one that works for you. That's the truth, not a platitude of like, it's supposed to be this way and that's just how it is. The truth is, it's going to be different. And for you two, that's going to be different, and you two is going to be different. And even if you're living together, even brother, sister could be different. Mom, dad could be different. And opening up to all the possibilities that are out there helps quite a bit. Now, if we stay in that high mode of vibration and thought, what ends up happening is we start being able to outthink ourselves. We start being able to go, whoa, wait a second. This is another way of approaching it. So with me, in terms of my approach of this information and getting it out into the mass mind, it's not about, you, sir, should be eating this, and don't have that, put that over there, you're supposed to be having this. Does that work? Or going to your mom saying, you should eat this, you should eat that, you should eat this, you should eat that, and don't have that. I know, 8 years it took me, 8 years to get my mom to come to me and say, I want to do this. 8 years it took, where I finally let it all go and said, if she wants to come that way, she will come that way, and if she does not, she does not. And living the example and allowing everything to happen in the way it does, it was amazing. This was 2 weeks ago. Thank you. Thank you. I was in Chicago and I said, what would happen if we fed a tribe of gorillas coffee and donuts for a week? Think about that. Some woman in the front row said they'd turn into cops. It was so funny, I almost had to stop the seminar. I apologize if there's any cops in the room, but it was really funny. Think about what we do. We are walking around and we're like, oh, we're going to get that food, and then we have to put something in between us and the food before we eat it. When we break it, just reduce it to ridiculous, we're putting something between us and the food. Why did humans start eating cooked food in the first place? Here's the theory. All vegetarian mammals eat clay, and the reason is this, is because, now I'm not talking about like dirt on the top, because they certainly do eat some of that too. What they eat subsurface clays. In fact, elephants will mine whole areas of forest, clear an entire area of forest, and mine under the ground to get to the subsurface clays, because subsurface clays have a high amount of negative ions in them. And what that does, it pulls all positively charged ions out of the intestinal tract and out of your body. It's like a vacuum. It pulls it all out. Any animal that is exposed to pesticides will immediately eat clay instinctively. Which is this is just information. It might be too much for you to look into right now, or it might come at a later time, just information. So here's the trip on this, is that in the seasons where the food that's available to the big, large mammals is diminished, what's been noticed is that the mammals will start, like elephants, let's just use that example, the elephants will start going for clay, big time. And what happens is that all natural plants in nature have secondary medicines, or otherwise known as secondary toxins. So in a small amount, no problem. In a larger amount, it becomes more medicinal. If you keep going because there's nothing else to eat, then you can run into trouble, because all of a sudden you're reaching toxic loads. When the food is diminished because of crisis or because of season, the animals will start to eat clay to neutralize the secondary toxins in the food that they're eating. So what the clay does is it pulls out the secondary elements but allows the absorption of the good stuff. What probably happened is that humans for sure ate this way too in the past. This is how we started on the planet. It seems almost for sure. And you look at all primitive cultures, you see that they all eat clay. and it's a part of their healing regime, and they use it seasonally and all of that. Way in the past, there was a cataclysm on the earth, and there's probably been many cataclysms that have occurred periodically, pole shifting, actually when the crust of the whole earth moves at once. You ever heard this theory before, the crustal displacement theory? The whole crust of the earth moves at once, and something that could be 2,000 miles out of the equator could all of a sudden be at the equator, just like in 20 hours, that quick. Those types of cataclysms we have a memory of, and we've lived through that, our ancestors have, and all of a sudden been thrust into situations where we had no food to choose from, or all of a sudden we went from 100 different choices to 10. And in that type of situation, we may have been thrust into a situation where no clay was available. And that's probably how cooking began, because cooking neutralizes the secondary medicines/toxins in food. Beans is a wonderful example. Beans are not a food. The only way they can be rendered edible, even sprouting beans, is even a tricky game. You can have a little bit of them, but sprouting does not completely eliminate the toxins that are in beans. Cooking does. So cooking will render beans, which are common on the planet, an edible substance and contribute probably to survival. And that's how cooking began. That's the latest theory. It seems certain, actually, and from the research I've done in this field, that's how it began, as best as I know it. Let's look at the example of an elephant. Now, elephants eat a wide variety of vegetation for about 11 months of the year, but there's 1 month in the year where the vegetation, because the dry season, starts to diminish, and they're forced to eat just a certain few plants, like 10 different plants, because that's all they have to eat. When that happens, these plants in nature have defense mechanisms so they don't get overgrazed. For example, like dandelion can get pretty darn bitter, and after a while, if you just keep eating it, you just go, it's too bitter. Can't do it anymore. That's called the alliesthetic taste change. So that's an alliesthetic taste change. I mean, alli meaning digestive, A-L-I, and aesthetic meaning feeling. And the alliesthetic taste change only happens when you're eating one type of raw food at a time, and it's just that food. Every plant then has a defense mechanism, and you can taste it through the alliesthetic taste change. Many of us have experienced this with pineapple. That's one of the best examples. You ever eaten pineapple? Like, you cut into the pineapple, and it's incredible, the first bite. And the second bite is so good, and the third bite's even better. And then, like 5 bites into the pineapple, it's not as good as it was. Then the next bite, it doesn't have any taste. Then the next bite does what? It burns you. See, that's the alliesthetic taste change. So something to become aware of. Food that is addictive is food like bread, which tends to have a high amount of sugar, low amount of minerals. Another way of saying sugar is starch. Starch, if you cook a starch, it turns into a pure sugar. One of the sweetest foods that is known is the standard russet hybridized potato. Once cooked, becomes like a pure sugar. In fact, it'll give you such a sugar kick, it'll send you spiraling out into the universe if you don't have a metabolism with which to handle that. Food like beer, high sugar, low minerals, and it starts to create this addiction process. Now, ancient foods don't have that process, and wild foods are definitely can survive in nature, and nature's always weeding out sweet, sugary things, and the plants are always trying to pull in as many minerals into the plant and create as many minerals. Here's the whole thing. Plants create minerals that weren't there before. I'll just throw that out there for your belief system to be able to handle that. We can come back to that. Anyway, the plant is always trying to get as much minerals in that plant as possible because the minerals fuel the enzymes, and the minerals keep out the bugs because that's what controls the immune system of the plant. We've gotten into an age, in our age, present day, right now, where the food is so demineralized that it cannot survive. Plants don't even have an immune system. Here's the thing. What is the plant's immune system? Plants have a little bit of toxic elements in them, otherwise known as medicines in small amounts and toxins in large amounts. A good example of this is buckwheat sprouts. In small amounts, great source of vitamin C, wonderful, perfect, beautiful. High amounts causes actually neurological damage and can actually hurt the nerves. I hope we're all aware of this. Now, I would recommend, I know when I was here, I ate buckwheat sprouts almost every day. I would recommend avoiding buckwheat sprouts every day because they're one of those foods that has a high amount of secondary medicines / toxins. What we've done with, let's just give an example, lettuce. Lettuce is a wonderful food. I mean, most of us would not even be alive right now without lettuce. That was the only thing that was like, there was the bread, the burger, and the bread. The only thing that was saving us was that lettuce. So let's be thankful for lettuce. At any rate, the lettuce today, for example, like compared to wild lettuce, the lettuce has no secondary medicines or no secondary toxins. You eat wild lettuce, after about 5 leaves, you go, woo, okay, I've had enough of that one, off to the next one. This is how wild foods are. It's because they're so rich that the plant itself can create what's necessary to keep animals from overgrazing them and wiping them out. When we've bred plants like this to be weak, they're actually total weaklings, the plants we have today that we grow commercially, that we have to spray them now just to keep the bugs out. We keep Mother Nature out. We keep the bugs out, the larvae out, the birds out, the worms out, the parasites out. Everything is kept out. The bacteria, the fungus, the yeast, the mold, that's all kept out for a while. Here is the future. This is it. That the disease of the future is already here. We already know it's cancer. It's already here. What is cancer? Well, it's very strongly related to fungus mold overgrowth. It's basically, we're starting to be recycled back into nature prematurely because fungus, yeast, and mold is getting a hold. Fungus, yeast, and mold is getting a hold because of this. The food is sprayed, keep Mother Nature out, then we send that food off. Let's just do a potato, for example. Take this big potato that's like glow-in-the-dark, three-dimensional VCR, remote control thing. That gets sent off. Then they send it. You know how French fries are made? They shoot them like those. You ever seen the tennis ball shooter that shoots a thing across the net and you hit the thing? It's like one after the other. That's how French fries are made now. They shoot one of those into a big grating the size of this wall that's razor blades that cuts them in their little boxes that big. That's why the French fry is that big, right, in thickness. And it's, or at least McDonald's or wherever you're going. And then it shoots across there, basically blasts the thing apart. There's a laser beam on the other side that scans for any blackness. If there's a little black spot on any of those potatoes, then it gets knocked off the track. An actual laser shoots across the thing. It's one of the most high-tech devices on the planet. It's used to make French fries. Then that all comes through. It's dipped into flavoring, and we don't now know that McDonald's French fries does contain beef flavoring, so it's not a vegan food. And then it gets sealed and frozen and shipped out to fast food restaurants. Well, Mother Nature is other than participating in that process, somehow. So fungus, yeast, mold, birds, parasites, larvae are all waiting. When's our chance? Well, all that stuff makes it to the health food store. It doesn't make the health food store, it makes it to the fast food place and gets into our body, and Mother Nature says, now's my chance. And the whole process of this low sugar, high starch food starts working against us because the parasites, the mold, the fungus feed on sugar. And when there's no minerals in the food, we become mineral deficient and the body cannot produce the immune response to knock back the fungus, yeast, and mold. This has been termed candida. We've heard that before. However, it's not just one little bug over here called candida and that's it. It's fungus, yeast, and mold. It's the whole thing. And it's caused by food that is grown agriculturally that's weak. You see that now? You see that's a whole different perception of what is candida? Oh, it's something I caught. Not at all. It's something that's the condition for it has been created over time. We are seeing today, we have really amazing. I was reading a book, it just hit cancer in everything, in every element. We see a huge growth in cancer. It's going to be the #1 killer on the planet in no time. What do we have? Well, one is we have a relationship to fungus, yeast, mold overgrowth. That's the main indicator of any kind of cancer condition. Number 2, we have total acid saturation of the tissue because people are eating anything but what? Raw food. And in what color food? Green food. Green food that's the only alkaline food. I used to read books. One book would say one thing. I'd be reading a book and be like, oh, okay, that's alkaline, that's acid, that's alkaline, this is acid, that's neutral. Another book would say, no, that guy had it all wrong. This is neutral, 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 acid, 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 alkaline. Next book would say something different. Finally, I got the idea that I would just look at the picture of the guy in the back of the book. That seemed to work better. Eating in nature, what you'll find is that it's real easy if you have like hemp seeds, for example, or pumpkin seeds. You can be eating nettles or you can be eating dandelion or whatever, and you can have a little bit of this going on. A little bit of pumpkin seed, a little bit of dandelion. This may mean something to you now, it may not. Here's another way of making it a little bit more useful is when you have a salad, that's when you have your seeds. You put your seeds in the salad. The seed and the leaf, by the way, in the relationship of nature, if you can, I know everybody here can really get this. The seed and the leaf, the relationship as nature is the acid-alkaline balance. That's a huge thing. It's a huge piece. That's the relationship in nature. That the acids in the plant are put into the seed because the seed needs explosive force, phosphorus, with which to produce the sprout. And the leaf has the calming alkaline energy. And when you put those two together, you get the acid-alkaline balance together. If someone, as anybody, I'm sure someone's done this here, where you've had like a handful of almonds and you just kept eating them and eating them and eating them, and then eventually it was like, uh-oh, I think I've had too many. It's like a brick thing. What do you do in that case? Well, you introduce the green leaves. And in that case, because it's too late, because the nuts have already been eaten, you do a green juice. And it creates an acid-alkaline balance, so you get a balance of everything. Real quickly on the acid-alkaline balance, just so we're clear, what's alkaline, what's acid? There's really only four alkaline foods. One is green leafy vegetables. You'll get it all. It's all coming. Green leafy vegetables. The other one is fruits of high alkaline content. Not very many of them. Many people think that fruits are alkaline. Most fruits are either neutral or slightly acidic. They're more alkaline than probably what people have normally been eating. That's for sure. But not alkaline enough. Some fruits, which we can go into if you'd love to later. Bone marrow or bone is alkaline. Just so we're just clear, and I'm going to give you the whole balance of nature and how nature works. Is alkaline. And then the fourth one is actually dairy products, either goat's milk or cow's milk, if you can digest them. But based on their minerals, they are alkaline. Okay, so that's one group. Now the acid flip side of this is one we already mentioned, which is what? Seeds. The other one? Avocado is a fruit, and it's actually pretty neutral, a little slightly acidic, but very, very neutral. That's why I say avocado. If you're going to let one thing run away with you, just let it be avocado. Which is a seed. Nuts are a seed. Citrus fruit is actually alkaline based on its minerals, is acid based on its chemistry. That's a tough, tricky one. As a class of foods, roots are acidic. As a class of foods. Here's another one. Let's just think of a standard kind of diet. What are most people eating? Meat, right? Meat is acid. The bone is alkaline. The meat is acid. That's the balance of nature. Just like the seed is acidic and the leaf is alkaline. There's this thing called the mineral directive principle in every living thing that basically portions out all the minerals to the different parts. Some parts are acid, some parts are alkaline. In our own body, our bones are alkaline. Our meat or our muscle is acidic. Our skin is acidic. Our gallbladder should be alkaline. Different organs will have totally different characteristics from each other. Okay, our brain should be alkaline. Whereas let's see, what's a good acid, acidic? Our liver should be acidic. So we have all these balances in our own body. And overall, they should balance out to exactly 7.0. Every creature in nature is exactly, you find a wild bear, they don't have to, this information I'm sharing right here about acid alkaline is instinctive, it's intuitive, you'll figure it out. You go long enough, you figure this out. A bear, you can measure its biochemistry and you'll find that its blood, its urine, and its saliva balance out to exactly 7.0. I had it done the other day when I was in New York. I had a test done. I had my blood tested, my urine tested, and my saliva tested. Totally 7.01. It was right on. You can't, you know what I'm saying? You just get into a place of instinctively knowing this is where it's all balanced out to. However, most of us are like at a 6.2 or 6.3, which means acidic. This is the scale, the pH scale. For some of you going, I have no idea what those numbers mean. Don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. Basically what I'm saying is it's an acid-alkaline balance that you get to once you understand how these things work. We're going to come back to hemp seed, so hang in there with me. So this other thing, we have roots, seeds, muscle. What else is in the acid category? Some fruits. Some fruits. And this is all in Eating for Beauty, by the way. If you want a diet, we actually got a beautiful diagram created by Zach, our cameraman. He actually drew it. It's beautiful. It's a nice little diagram of its color and all that. Anyway, what do most people eat? You go to a burger joint, what do you get?
Burger and fries.
Burger and fries. So what's there? You've got the fries. What's that? It's a root, so it's an acid. And then you've got the burger. What's the burger? It's muscle, so it's meat. And then you've got the bun, or the bread, which is made out of?
Seeds.
You see it now? Roots, seed, muscle. Is civilization's diet. That's called normal, and that's highly acidic. You see why it is now? So the green food is what balances this all out. This is why I'm saying when I talk about green juice, I'm not just talking through my teeth here. That is a critical piece of the whole thing. Green superfoods to restore the balance so you get that proper acid-alkaline balance. If someone's at a 6.2 or 6.3 pH, they can do green juice for a year, and I've seen people do it, and raise their pH to maybe a 6.4, 6.5. With superfoods, you can raise it to a 6.8 in a year, and eventually get it to a 7.0. That's strictly scientific. That's how much of a difference superfoods can make because they apply the minerals right to the site quickly in a concentration that the body just finally has to go, okay, I'm letting it all in. I'm allowing it to happen. At any rate, what is really alkaline is food that's green in color. And this is the great balancer. If you're into Buddhism, it's the center of the mandala. It's the very center. It's everything revolves around that. What else is cancer related to? Well, it's also related to just a toxic overload. Just massive amounts of pesticides, all kinds of chemical solvents, chemicals, all kinds of food dyes, additives, preservatives. Finally, the body just goes, I don't know. We're just going to try to hide it over here, and we'll see how long we can hold it here until the thing just busts. You ever walk into someone's house, and there's just stuff everywhere? Stuff everywhere. It's like on the counters. They've got 5 different types of drapes. They've got cabinets full of stuff. You open up the closet, and stuff starts falling out. God forbid if you should ever open the refrigerator. Just stuff. This is an exact representation of all the stuff that can have accumulated in here. That I've noticed traveling around. I always ask raw foodists, take me to your place, let's have a little meal, because that's a great thing when you're traveling and doing what I do. I get to have this great food from people who are really good raw food chefs. Well, I go to their house, and it's almost always this very zen environment, like this. There's not big stuff all over here, big things over there, and stuff wrapped all over the walls, and all kinds of stuff like that. It's very simple. Because as you cleanse on the inside, all that stuff gets cleansed out. That once we cleanse that stuff out, by the way, something also happens, which is amazing. If we push the insulation out, what ends up occurring is we start to tune into our intuition better, or the phrase is our gut feeling about things. I'd love it if you came to my lectures every year. And 6 years from now, if you're still coming to lectures going, what do I eat, how do I eat, what am I supposed to do? There was a part of the lecture that was missed, because here's the big thing, is that you take on the message and go with it and take it at your own pace, and you figure it out for yourself. I'm not actually here to give you answers. Actually, what I'm providing here is the opportunity for you to ask new questions, and then you yourself figure out the answers. That some point down the road, you'll be able to walk into a health food store and go, yes, 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 no, no, yes. And you'll just know what to eat. That is the promise, that you can figure it out for yourself. And that's why it's so empowering. I'm guessing, this is just a guess, I'm not a conspiracy theory buff. I like that kind of stuff, it's fun to read. And my guess is that at the very top, they want us to fill us up with garbage so we can't even think. And if we're filled up with fungus, yeast, and mold, guess what happens? We can't think. It's the cloud here. This is the first symptom of candida. Spotty memory. Memories, it just kind of, some days it's on, some days it's off. Cloudy thoughts, feel like brain fog. Other things would be chronic yeast infections. This process, actually, this understanding that the amount of sugar in food has a direct relationship with fog in the brain, that's when things start to get real clear. Because what will happen is, if you start cutting down foods and even cutting out foods entirely that are rich in sugar, low in starch, or low in minerals, what happens is you start getting your thinking back and everything starts to come clear again. If, this saying we have, someone's lazy, they've been loafing around, because a loaf of bread causes laziness. And if we put a piece of bread out here and a piece of fruit and a piece of green leafy vegetable here, which one's going to mold first?
Bread.
Absolutely. What's happening is we're actually molding. An interesting concept. And foods that don't mold make us strong. And that immune system modulating raw foods that don't mold is the future. You heard it here. So just hear that one again. Immune system modulating raw foods that don't mold is the future. We were talking about candida earlier. A lot of candida symptoms are basically poor digestion symptoms, because that's what candida does. Fungus causes poor digestion and poor assimilation. Enzymes help that process. I feel like it's much more powerful to take enzymes when you're totally raw than when you're not. However, they help either way. And probiotic bacteria, in terms of an overall strategy against candida. Our body is always in a balance. It's always in this battle between fungus, yeast, and mold. Fungus, yeast, and mold is nature's recyclers. It's always on us. In some way, nature is always trying to recycle us in the ground. And if we are strong enough to withstand that, we hang out on the planet. And if we're not, we get recycled right back into the earth. But what keeps fungus, yeast, and mold at bay? Good bacteria. By volume, in terms of the number of bacteria, we consist more of bacteria than we do of our own cells. In fact, there's about 10 times more bacteria in our body than our own cells, which gets into the whole thing of what's us and what's bacteria. So, friendly bacteria are essential for absorption, and they're there, and we can have up to 400 different types of soil organisms and friendly bacteria. Most of us have less than 60. And that's just to throw this out there, that the connection between us and the soil can be reestablished. I mean, have you ever heard of someone just ungrounded? Because they never had soil in their body ever. What's a child's second food? Dirt. Why? First food is what? Milk, which contains probiotic bacteria. That's the primary role of milk, actually, is to supply probiotic bacteria. And the baby's second food is dirt, to create the connection. See how that works? The probiotic bacteria and the soil together create the balance in here, so that our own garden, which is actually turned inside out with our roots pointing into our intestines, you see how this all works? That's what we are. We're a walking plant. And our roots are turned inside, and so we have to produce the nutrients into here, and our little villi pick that stuff up, our roots. It's the exact analogy. And probiotic bacteria, it's like the scales are weighing. If you get enough probiotic bacteria, it'll drive up fungus, yeast, and mold, and it's very effective. And I was telling someone earlier, in terms of the plaque and all that, how do you get it out? Well, one very effective way to get it out is L. salivarius, which is one particular strain of bacteria that actually eats up plaque. And you can get that. I mean, health food stores have that. You can go, I want L. salivarius as a probiotic, and they have it. That particular probiotic is available. Another thing I wanted to mention, many people claim it is the #1 cause of disease. It is probably the reason why the primates don't live to extreme longevity like we would expect that they do. Because in the tropics where the primates live, in tropical climates, see, all of us are thinking, we've got to get to the tropics because this is, what we can't put up with this much longer. At the same time, you have to understand that when you get to the tropics, there's another challenge that comes in, and that is parasites. And parasites are very, very powerful in the tropics. Parasitical protozoa, worms, giardia, etc. And so that's the challenge there. And so monkeys and primates that live in the tropics have to have a very specific diet to be able to survive that. Humans who've lived in that climate for a long time have developed medicines like ayahuasca to be able to burn out all those parasites from the Amazon. If you've studied the Amazonians, I mean, how could you hold on to your genetic integrity in a place where parasites are in the air? They're coming through the floor of the jungle into your feet. I mean, worms will come in that way. They're in the food. It's just everywhere. It's in the water. So this is, how do you protect yourself? Well, they have figured out how to do this in some tropical places, and many of the primates do the best they can, and it's still pretty overwhelming, the parasite load. A lot of primates are so strong genetically because they're pure, they've only ate raw food, they've only eaten wild food for their whole life, that they can have a parasite load and have no symptoms of having parasites. That's kind of interesting, that they can have a parasite load and have no symptoms of having parasites because they're so strong. What the opportunity for us on the planet is that we can become completely parasite-free. Now, if you think that you possibly, the person next to you is the one with worms, or the person next to you is the one with like fluke worms or whatever it is, liver flukes, it's possible that it might not be the person next to you. It's possible it could be you. Because if we've ever had a very weakening illness, a pneumonia, some point in our childhood where we almost died, things like this, parasites that could have been present in the food might have bored their way deep into our tissues and might still be feeding off us. Isn't that fascinating? And there's been many doctors and many naturopathic physicians, alternative medical practitioners, who've declared that parasites are the #1 cause of disease. I would say that that's more of a symptom than anything. However, it is a factor. And the other piece of cleansing, the fourth piece here, is about parasite cleansing. If you're in India for 6 months, I'd recommend coming back and doing a 100-day parasite flush, because they have parasites over there that we never even heard of over here, that our body is not at all adapted to and can really affect us over a long period of time or even in the immediate future. Even if you don't believe that you can get parasites up in this climate, I would still recommend doing a 100-day parasite flush at some point in your journey and seeing what happens. It's one of those things. When you get tar out, something flips in your mind. You get worms out of your body, something flips in your mind, where you realize that we could have been lied to, that that's not just some idea, that's possible, and that there could be parasites in your body and you wouldn't even have known it. There's a whole philosophy of thought that says the world itself is run by parasites. I'll just leave that up to your imagination. Politics. Many poly-ticks. That's another form of cleansing. Anyway, so there's a whole theory that because we become nutritionally weakened, which really means demineralized by food that's not nearly in its natural state. By the way, organic food is 2 to 20 times the mineral content of commercial food, and wild food may have 50 times the mineral density of commercial food. That's good information. That's a good piece of information. Because we become demineralized, we may not be able to produce the proper immune response to whatever's hitting us, and therefore stuff can crawl its way into our tissues, and we can be carrying that burden and have no idea. And there are many, many naturopathic physicians and alternative medical practitioners who claim that parasites are the #1 cause of disease. Now, I've seen that a lot, and I've seen, parasites in people, and maybe it's true. I don't know. I'm just opening you up to that possibility. I personally think that demineralization is really the #1 cause of disease and makes the possibility of parasites working their way in a likely chance. Once we have discernment about what we're going to allow in, this is why I don't eat meat or any flesh product, is because who the heck knows what's in that? I mean, I would never swim in the water that fish live in now. Never. I wouldn't even swim in that, let alone eat food that comes out of that. No way. It's just too polluted. Who knows what's in there? When we deal with animal food, see, like what does a fish do? A fish is going, what are these things called? And what's another name for them? Filters. Filters. So they're filtering all that stuff. What's that stuff? I don't know. I don't want to know, so I'll avoid that. Because now I know enough in this field where I don't have to go to that source to get omega-3 fatty acids, or I don't have to go to that source to get vitamin B12, or whatever. That the first step of all of this for anybody is becoming juicy again, which would look like drinking fresh juices, and in particular, vegetable juices. Now, how many people drink fresh vegetable juice every single day as a discipline? One. I will tell you that out of thousands of people that I've met who are on raw food, doing a raw food lifestyle, that the easiest way there, the most effective way to allow your body to begin to gain a facility and an education as to how to digest vegetation is to drink the juice of the plant. Because the juice of the plant provides your body with what's necessary to educate your body into how to digest fibrous plant material, how to digest the whole food. That we've actually grown up in an era where we don't eat vegetables, or what vegetables we've eaten have been cooked carrots or potato chips or French fries. We've lost some facility to digest vegetation, and therefore we become averse to it and try to skip around it in any way we can, trying to take in foods that fill in the mineral gap which is left by not eating vegetation. The best way to fill in that gap is to start drinking vegetable juice. Gives you the facility to digest, rebuilds your whole digestive system, and then you can start digesting salads better, extracting more, bringing in green. When we bring in green, we're clean. Green being the heart chakra. Most people in this civilization die of what? A heart attack, which means they die of closed heart chakra, which means lack of compassion. Isn't that interesting? 1 million chickens a day are slaughtered to feed this city. 1 million chickens. That's a city of chickens every day to feed this city. That this is a civilization that has closed its heart to compassion. And that's why everybody dies of what? Closed heart. There is a relationship. And what we find is even more interesting. Studies have been done on people with heart disease and what minerals are deficient and what minerals the heart actually runs on, because each organ runs on different minerals. Turns out, deficiency of magnesium and potassium. Magnesium is the mineral that's in chlorophyll. Isn't that funny? Magnesium is the mineral that's in chlorophyll, and potassium is found on the leaf growing edge. Potassium, like in parsley. Potassium is found in lettuce. Potassium is found in leaves. It's found in other things too. Sprouts in particular. Sprouts in particular. Juiciness means more facility to move, that the joints become juicy, and that when you work on someone's back and you get in there, it's like, oh my God, there's rocks in here. How did rocks get in here? Because the food of a lifetime has become so dense that nothing could penetrate. And that as you lighten up and let your tissues be bathed in juice, everything softens up and becomes spongy and malleable the way we're supposed to have lived all the way back. that we really cannot have an insight, and no scientist, no matter how much of no matter how experienced they are with animals, watching animals, can know what a wild animal experiences eating wild food. The assumption is that we can know, and the fact is we can't know, because a wild animal experiences a different reality than we do because they ate different their whole life. They can go from 0 to 30 miles an hour instantly without pulling a muscle. They can do amazing feats of agility without stretching. They have an incredible strength. I always wondered when I was growing up, why is it that animals, wild animals, are so much stronger and more agile than us? It never was properly answered for me. And what was interesting is over all my life asking that question, I finally did find the answers out. There's two reasons. One is they eat raw food, the natural food that has juice in it. The other reason is that they eat wild food, which has constitutional prana in it, high life force, high electromagnetism. In fact, food that has the most electromagnetism of any food is young green plants in the wild state. Has the most electromagnetic force of any food, has the most constitutional building elements in it. It makes you strong in the most unique way, in the most unique way. Well, if we've got enough juice in our body, what happens is we start to actually have some motility, the ability to move around in our body properly, because this right in here is a floating ocean. And the juice that's in here, by the way, must consist of two main elements. One is water, and the other is what? Does anybody have a guess? What holds water in our body? Salt. So somehow life figured out how to wrap an ocean into a skin and have the ocean walk on land. Somehow plants figured out how to become mobile and wrap themselves in around themselves, and instead of putting roots out into soil, put roots into soil. And the analogy is that our intestines are our soil and that we are actually a mobile plant. Genetically, we don't differ much from plants, strangely enough. We differ only about 60% from an oak tree. 40%, excuse me. We're 60% similar to an oak tree. That water and salt actually create the ocean environment. Salt water, for example, we have a whole mythology in our culture that salt water from the ocean is not drinkable. Now, if someone is not in tune with their body, toxic, and had never done anything like that before, doesn't have any idea what their overall juice balance is in their body of minerals and salts and all that, then it probably is very dangerous to drink seawater, because that would cause a reaction. However, the more in tune you are and the more you become like the ocean and in tune with nature and the flow of nature, you can drink ocean water, and quite a bit of it with no side effects. That to me was a startling revelation. See, here's the possibility, and it's just a possibility. It's not like this is the way it is. It's just a possibility that everything we've been told could be up for grabs, could be totally up for grabs. Who knows? Whenever we are beginning on a process like this, because we have eaten lots of weird stuff in our life, our digestive system can be compromised. Big key here, because I think some of you are going to get a lot out of this little piece. That what can happen is our digestive system can be compromised. So if we start dumping in massive amounts of, well, I'm just going to eat celery, and then I'm going to eat this, I'm going to have that, and this and that, we can get overwhelmed with fiber, which we may never have had, because turkey's not fiber, chicken's not fiber, Twinkie's not fiber, none of that's, cheese isn't fiber, dairy products not fiber, goat's milk's not fiber, yogurt's not fiber. The only fiber is that rigid element that's holding that plant together over there and holding that plant together. That's what fiber really is. And if that fiber is coming through our system in high doses, we never saw that before, our body goes, I don't know what to do, but we've got to do something, and it starts to get inflamed or irritated or can't digest it properly. And this can happen if we're new to this whole conversation. The way we step around that is we start bringing in the juices of that vegetable, and the juices provide the elements necessary to build the digestive capacity in our own body to break down the fiber of that plant so that when we finally do put in the whole plant, then it's able to be digested. Here's an example: celery juice. If you want something that's soft, easy, a lot of people are into the whole trip of like, well, I need to do a cleanse and I need to have 15 ounces of wheatgrass juice every day, and they're drinking it, tears are pouring down, and the whole killing themselves, trying to save themselves routine really doesn't work very long. What ends up happening is someone actually just finally says, screw the whole thing, I'm going back to fast food or to whatever. Well, here's what's soft and what's easy, and here's the example is celery. Celery is the highest natural source of sodium chloride. Sodium chloride builds both the alkaline and acid balance of the stomach. Right here, we have in our stomach both a sodium buffer and a chloride buffer, which one is the extreme alkaline, one's the extreme acid. Chloride combines with hydrogen to create hydrochloric acid, and sodium combines with a hydroxy ion, which is OH, it's a base, to form sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide, yeah, sodium hydroxide, which is a base. So whenever we have something that's extremely acidic, let's say someone drank a soda, sodium hydroxide is required to neutralize that. Then if someone has something very alkaline, an acid is required to break it down. What's an alkaline food again? Green food. And what's used to break down green food? Anybody know? An acid, hydrochloric acid. And that's the two extremes, and those are both found in celery juice. Now, celery is very fibrous, so if you have celery juice, you start to gain the ability to digest fiber and to digest the celery itself. Isn't that interesting? Once we start getting down into here, if we've had pizza, pushing cupcakes, pushing French fries, pushing crisps, pushing sandwiches, pushing beer, pushing lager, pushing spirits, pushing Twinkies, pushing donuts, pushing bread, pushing pasta, well, eventually what happens is the body goes, I don't know what this is. The liver goes, I'm through. The intestines just go, well, we're putting a wall up. We're going to try to protect ourselves. That'll work. And that's called the mucoid plaque. It's called the mucus barrier. That's created just to keep everything out. I mean, to keep you from just going sideways. That mucus barrier actually begins to coat the whole of the 30 feet of our intestines. And when we drink juice fresh, what happens is it gets the minerals and the nutrients and the water into the bloodstream without having to worry about can we digest through that mucus barrier. Because once we get that pulverized fiber and nutrients from a salad into the intestines, if there's mucus all over those intestines, the ability of the body to extract and pull and get all the goodies out is less than ideal. This is where most of us can have been, and maybe even now, is that we may have what we call it the rubber tire. Some people are going, well, it's that person over there, not here. There probably is that person over there, but that's okay. That the other person right there next to you could have a rubber tire in their intestines. Now, that might sound like some kind of weird, fantastic thing until the day you see it come out. And when you see that rubber tire come out, and it doesn't look like anything that's ever come out before, and it doesn't smell like anything that came out before, because it's stale, and it's hard and rubbery, then a new insight is there. And I'm not here to tell you what that insight's going to be, because when you experience that, you'll know, uh-oh, something was a little bit different than what I've been told. It's like that same experience. Anybody ever had a worm come out? People going, what did I get myself into? It's one of those things like, well, everybody else has worms, I don't. And then you see this long string of mucus, and you go, was that mucus, or what is that? It looks like mucus. And there is a possibility that someone could have worms. Here's what's unique, and here's a promise that I can make for you, is that if you sponge that stuff out, what happens is that the shape of your intestines will literally revert back into its actual original place. The promise of raw food nutrition is that you can not only start to get back into your genetic blueprint of what you're really supposed to look like, in addition to that, you're able to even get into your archetypical blueprint. Now, how does this relate? Every organ in our body is actually represented in every other organ. You've heard of this before, like our hand represents every organ in our body, our eyes, iridology. You've heard this about reflexology on our feet. And this is true also in our internal organs, that if our intestine, our long, small intestine, is malformed due to breakfast pushing lunch, pushing dinner, plaque builds up, everything gets rearranged, things get kinked, and it's not actually in its right place, our appearance will be other than it's supposed to be. It'll be other than our natural genetics. And as we get that stuff out, actually all that stuff comes into place, and the shape of our face will and can change. The shape of our bones will and can change. This is the promise of raw food nutrition. Now, against the better wish of my ego, I actually did put a before picture in here. And any of you who have seen this, I mean, that was me in 1993. I don't know if you can see that from out there. If you can't see it, good. And it's page 3. No, it's at the end of the book. And so then that's me a number of years later. And you can see the difference actually in the structure of my face. Now, I've noticed for myself, and I can really, the only thing we really know is our own experience. And I've tried very carefully to word things in such a way so that I'm not talking about someone else's experience that I don't really know about. It's got to be my experience for us to really know it, or at least for me to really know it. Did everyone see that? I hope not. At any rate, for me, my structure, my cheeks changed. So my cheekbones are higher now. My upper jaw, what they call it a cleft, I guess it was, or the palate actually, is wider. It's actually wider, so there's space between all my teeth up here where they used to be crowded. The congenital deformity that is caused by a demineralized diet and afflicts almost everyone who lives in Western civilization is crowded teeth, because the minerals are not there in order to fully structure the jaw properly. One of my good friends, Rick, his daughter, Catherine, I used to go out with her years ago, and I remember her smile was amazing because she'd been raised since age 9 on raw food and really eating lots of green food. And when she smiled, she had a complete set of teeth like the Aboriginals have. I mean, everything in place, all perfect. Her jaw was structured perfectly. And even if we've been around the sun a number of times, it is still possible that we can start to get more spacing between our teeth, and that our wisdom teeth actually can have space to come in. If we look at the teeth of primates, like chimpanzee teeth, I've always found that fascinating. What are their teeth like? Well, they have space between all their teeth. And that's really how our teeth are supposed to be, instead of having food traps between each tooth. That's part of the promise of getting that stuff out of your system. How do you get that stuff out? Sometimes eating raw food alone is not enough to get it out. And that's an interesting insight, is that herbal cleanses like the Ejuva cleanse or the Arise and Shine cleanse, and there are other ones out there, have strong, harsh herbs that basically they soften the plaque or stimulate the intestines to knock the plaque off. One of the most powerful things about MSM, some of you have heard about MSM, methyl sulfonyl-methane, which is an elemental food. It's like oxygen is an elemental food. Another elemental food is water. H2O is an elemental food. MSM is not a supplement. It's an elemental food. It appears in nature in rain, in the evaporation cycle. It's created as a byproduct of algae life in the oceans. It's evaporated into the clouds. What MSM does actually, though, is it causes flexibility to come back into the tissues. And if we have grown up in a way where we were not living on rainwater and snow for our water needs, everybody in this room is deficient in MSM, guaranteed. And what happens is it's the first thing it works on, because if you put it in your digestive tract, like you drink it with water, and that's what I recommend, you actually mix it with water and drink it so the water becomes like rainwater, it'll start to soften up all your intestines so that they start to get permeability back, and it actually causes your intestines to become like Teflon so that nothing can stick in there anymore, and the plaque sometimes can peel right off. This is all well and good, and I know you've got your attention here, and this really begins to make sense when you see it come out. This is why I do recommend that everybody who's on this path, if you want to get into deeper cleansing and deeper inner knowledge about yourself, to see that, to make that happen, I recommend an herbal cleanse and get that stuff sponging out of the system so that you can begin to go, whoa, and just have a new insight or a shift in perception, as we talked about earlier. Another thing that can help it soften out is fasting. That's how I first got plaque out, actually. I fasted for 10 days on water, and when I broke the fast, I don't know what came out, but that wasn't anything like what had come out before. And that was a huge thing for me, because that was the first time I'd ever seen plaque come out of my body. And then in subsequent cleanses, other stuff has come out, and it's a beautiful thing just to have all that stuff out there instead of in here anymore. Again, the gut instinct or the gut feeling starts to come back. You ever studied, each part of our body has different types of emotions. Just throwing this out there, you ever studied Paul Pearsall's book where he wrote about 20 years of heart transplant patients? This is amazing, that people started to take on the characteristics of the people whose hearts they got. And they were characteristics that were related to love, compassion, pity. Sometimes they were words that, like the wife would say, he never said that word before. What does this mean? And what actually we know from this now is that memories, emotions, all of this are located in different areas. Why I'm bringing this up is because when you start cleansing that stuff out, you can have memories come back that you hadn't thought of in 10 years. And you can know, whoa, I'm releasing a Flintstones chewable vitamin that I ate when I was 10 because the memory of it will come back. Did you have those over here? I had that happen one time. I guess I was going through some kind of detox, and I tasted it in my mouth, and I thought, and all the memories came back. So I guess my body had kind of unpeeled that layer of the onion and gotten down and released that stuff. And it's amazing how much stuff we can have tucked in under the rug. The raw food is beautiful because, in a way, as you do that sponging and cleansing, it is a one-way street, and you ought to know that. You ought to know that, and very seriously. That it's like the Matrix. You know, when you take, what is it, the blue pill or the red pill? Once you take the red pill, it's one way. You get the rubber tire out, and you can actually feel the food and how it affects you. Many of us have had the experience of, I can eat anything, and it doesn't affect me. And what happens is, once you can absorb, it does affect you. Cooked oil, actually, is what causes heart disease, if we had to pick one thing. Obviously, it's a complicated situation. Here's an interesting insight. In talking with Dr. Gabriel Cousins, wow, what a wealth of information he is. Everything I run into, I think I'm the first person to come across it. I go to him, he's like, well, check this out, blah, 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 blah. He just totally has it dialed in already. He told me, really interestingly, that most people who die of a heart attack don't die from their heart being constricted by the coronary artery clogging. Are we familiar with how a heart attack actually occurs? There's veins or arteries that actually feed the heart itself. And when one of those arteries gets clogged, it's called the coronary artery, what happens is that the artery gets choked off and it starves the heart of oxygen. That's the theory. Anyway, it turns out that's not what happens. What happens is that the cooked oil, right, is actually what clogs the coronary artery, at least causes the amount of diameter to decrease. There's just a small little hole that oxygen and nutrients are getting through, and an infection starts on the inside, and it's the infection that causes the heart attack, not the lack of oxygen. The actual constricting of the artery is just a symptom of the overall situation and isn't actually the cause. It's actually the infection due to lack of oxygen. Nitrogen-breathing organisms basically infect the body when there's enough cooked oil in to starve out oxygenation. When a huge amount of cooked oil comes into the body, it's not miscible with water. What happens is the blood cells clump up, trying to deal with it, trying to break it down, break it apart, enzymatically trying to rearrange it, do whatever it can. And through that dance, what happens is there's an oxygen deprivation, and parasites, fungus, and mold come right in, because parasites, fungus, and mold breathe nitrogen in many cases, not oxygen. So fully oxygenating our system is a huge piece of all this. One of the things why I'm so big into wild green foods is because they contain a high amount of chlorophyll, which is a huge amount of oxygen. Chlorophyll itself is extremely antiviral, antifungal, has all those properties. It's a deodorizer so that everything comes through smelling nice and beautiful. What an amazing thing it is where we live in a city here where there's 1 million chickens killed every day to feed this city. And so, the whole argument about, well, how are we going to unwind our way out of this thing? How are we going to save the planet Earth? Here's how you save the planet Earth. You save yourself, because you are the planet Earth. So I'll just say that one again. And sometimes you might hear that a few times and not really get it. Here's the thing. How do you save the planet Earth? People are out there parading, protesting. We have to stop this, stop drilling, no oil, let's not have a war, not that, the other thing. We've got to go stop something out there. That's my suggestion to you, and I could be wrong on this. I don't think I am. It's just my suggestion is that is never going to do anything. That the only thing that does anything is your example. It's like that phrase by Emerson, which I borrow a little bit, which is, who you are speaks so loudly that no one can ever hear a word you're saying. Who you are speaks so loudly that no one can ever hear a word you're saying. And that attraction is much more powerful than, we have to do this, stop, don't do that, do this. Attracting. That's how lives are shifted and transformed. Really, ideal health depends on a couple things. One, obviously, nutrition is kind of the key that makes it all work because it compels certain behavior. And that's the word that I choose very carefully. It compels certain behavior, meaning it kind of nudges you. You really should be out hiking, or you really should be out in the sun, or you should really be out exercising, or you really should get out of this job because this isn't the right thing for you, and that job can cause you to start reaching for foods that you don't want to be having in your body anymore. Or you really should get into the sunshine or go on that retreat or fly to India or do something different. That's what happens. So it's different. Actually, what it is like taking in different information, like browsing the internet, where you get to choose what you're looking at instead of the BBC telling you what you get to look at. Very different, isn't it? That's the whole discipline about really healthy eating, is making sure you have your salad a day and your green juice every day. If you have that discipline, you have all the disciplines necessary to take it all the way. Because you'll find that's the one thing you'll be like, well, I don't need to do that. That's for everybody else. Or somebody else can do that. I'm going to skip that. But you'll find that when you do those disciplines, something happens. Especially if you're new to this. Again, revisiting the idea we talked about earlier, that if you can get your green juice into this body daily as a discipline, miraculous things will occur, and the whole thing becomes so easy. Because the green food is so alkaline, it starts to balance out the acid-alkaline balance. That all the food we've probably ever eaten has been so hyperacidic, and we've literally been bred through civilization to hold on to anything alkaline and try to flush out everything acid, and hold on to the little bit of alkalinity that we have and just flush out everything acid, that eventually that can catch up with us. But when we do get that balance restored and everything comes into its right relationship or right ratio, it really is magic. I mean, it really is magic, because then you'll know. It's like everything is just perfectly balanced. You know, I'm right at that point. I'm right at my 0 point. Everything's perfect. And a lot of times, getting the acidity balanced out with the alkalinity, that process is actually what causes detoxification. Because when acids get flushed out of the system, they show up in your bloodstream, and it can cause crazy cravings for food, or you'll taste things like penicillin that you had 32 years ago, or for me it was Flintstones chewable vitamins that I had when I was 5. My friend Igor Butenko got force vaccinated with smallpox vaccine when he was 5, and he detoxified that when he was 44. So he carried that around with him for 39 years, somewhere tucked away. That is what detoxification is about. And really, in right understanding about detoxification, some of us can go through worse detoxification than others. Some of us, for whatever reason, our body just deals with the toxins easier. Some of us, it's like the most crazy roller coaster ride ever. Better that stuff's out, by the way, than in. And I like Winston Churchill saying, if you're going through hell, keep on going. That's the only thing you can do at that point. We're already here, we might as well just keep on going.